the invisible root that nourishes all suffering. When we arrive at the third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, we go beyond merely recognizing that life is suffering, the first noble truth or understanding where suffering comes from, the second noble truth. We begin to ask a deeper question: can suffering truly end? And if so, how do we end it? But uncovering the deepest root where suffering silently begins. This root, the Buddha called the origin of suffering, samadaya, which arises from the accumulation of greed, hatred, and delusion. Not just in this lifetime, but across countless lifetimes. When these emotional defilements are repeated over and over again, they don't just leave temporary impressions. They harden into unconscious patterns that shape how we think, speak, and act. These patterns are what we call karma. Put simply, karma is the habit of the mind, a collection of mental grooves formed by repeated thoughts, words, and actions. It's the familiar way we instinctively react to life. When we're hurt, we lash out. When we feel abandoned, we shut down. When we see someone doing better than us, we compare and feel lacking. These reactions may seem natural, but in truth, this is why two people can go through the same event, but one breaks down in tears while the other stays calm. One overreacts to small setbacks, while another remains composed. It's not just about personality. It's the fruit of karma, of seeds planted long ago. Often, we don't understand why we suffer. I haven't done anything wrong, we tell ourselves. But the truth is, we're only seeing the surface. Beneath that surface are invisible impressions silently nurtured in the mind. Karma isn't just about doing bad deeds, as many mistakenly believe. An unwillingness to forgive is karma. Each of these small choices adds to the reservoir of our inner conditioning. Karma is not a punishment, but a flow of habit, and as with any flow, it can be redirected. The Buddha taught, karma can be transformed. This is a powerful truth. If karma were fixed and unchangeable, then spiritual practice would be futile. But because karma can change, every moment of mindfulness, every conscious breath, every act of compassion becomes a new seed, a seed of peace, awareness, and liberation, no longer rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion. Karma is like soil. If left unattended, weeds will grow. But if you tend to it, remove the weeds, and plant wholesome seeds, it will bloom with beauty. Likewise, if we don't train the mind, our old habits, born of unconscious karma, will take over, and suffering will grow. But if we return to the present moment with mindfulness, observe the mind without judgment, and stop identifying with every fleeting emotion, then the very soil of karma can be transformed. In other words, karma is where suffering is born, but also where peace can be cultivated. It is not fate. It is not a prison sentence. It is the consequence of what we have repeated for too long. And because of that, anyone, no matter how lost, wounded, or burdened by the past, can start again, right here and now. Because the present is where past karma ripens, but also where new karma is sown. 6.2. When suffering doesn't come on its own. A story of karma and psychological wounds. There are kinds of suffering in life that leave us stunned. Why do people look down on me when I live a decent life? There are those who, from a very young age, have been hated, abused, and insulted, even though they did nothing wrong. As they grow up, the cycle continues, being misunderstood, mistreated, and belittled, as if suffering were a destiny woven into their very existence. But suffering doesn't arise out of nowhere. In the light of the Buddha's teachings, every pain has a root. Every wound has a cause, though that cause may lie buried deep beneath layers of time, lifetimes, and consciousness. One Buddhist story reveals this truth with striking subtlety. The woman who was scorned, the price of mocking a saint in a past life. During the Buddha's time, there was a woman who was extremely kind and virtuous. Yet she was constantly disrespected by those around her. Although she lived sincerely, cared for her family, and never harmed anyone, wherever she went she received disdainful looks, mocking words, or was shunned for no reason. This caused her great sorrow. Sometimes she looked up at the sky and wondered, what did I do wrong? I live righteously, so why am I still treated like someone lowly? When she came to pay respect to the Buddha, she carried that silent grievance in her heart. The Blessed One, with his divine eye, looked deeply into her past karma, and said, "Dear one, it's not because you are evil in this life that people look down on you. In a distant past life, you were a wealthy man, arrogant and proud. One day, you saw an arahant dressed in tattered robes going for alms, and you laughed at him, mocking his appearance and insulting a noble one. Though the monk remained silent. Your arrogant scorn became a powerful karmic seed. Now, in this life, that seed has ripened, so even though you are good-hearted, people still scorn you, reflecting that old karmic imprint." Upon hearing this, the woman burst into tears. But they were not tears of anger or injustice. They were tears of awakening. She realized that suffering did not come to punish her, but to call her inward, to help her see the invisible roots of her own pain. Karma is not punishment. It is the unseen continuum of cause and effect. Many people misunderstand karma. They think, karma is not a judge or a divine punishment. It is the natural unfolding of cause, condition, and result, like rivers flowing downstream, like seeds sprouting when the conditions are right. An action done today may not bear fruit right away. A hardship experienced now may be the result of tangled karmic causes from the distant past, from lifetimes we no longer remember. That is why many kind people still suffer injustice, and why some selfish people remain rich and praised. Buddhism doesn't deny these phenomena. It simply looks deeper and sees that each person is journeying through a different karmic cycle. Some seeds are ripening, some remain dormant, and some wholesome seeds haven't yet met the conditions to sprout. Only those with deep wisdom can perceive the full workings of karma without falling into anger, self-pity, or blame, or the hurtful words adults carelessly throw at a tender heart. Some grow up in wealthy homes, but constantly feel inadequate. Others become successful, but feel emotionally starved. But through the lens of mindfulness and Buddhist insight, we can also see them as expressions of karmic streams passed down through generations. Parents do not intentionally hurt their children, but they, too, were once wounded children. They do not know how to love healthily because they never received healthy love. No one to blame, only the truth to see clearly. When you understand this, something beautiful happens. Your suffering is no longer your fault, nor your parents', nor anyone else's. That person can become the start of a new cycle. So when you are hurting, don't ask, "Who hurt me?" Instead ask, "Am I continuing to hurt myself and others because I haven't yet understood my own pain?" No blame is needed. No judgment is required. Just recognition. And that is the first step to transformation. 6.3. No blame. Only recognition. Stepping out of the karmic loop. There's a strange pattern in the human experience. The more we suffer, the more we tend to look for someone or something to blame. We blame our parents for not loving us the right way, blame society for being unfair, blame fate for being cruel. Some even go as far as blaming karma, as if it were an inescapable destiny that leaves us helpless. But deep within all of that blame lies a mind that has not yet turned inward. Because when we continue to blame others, circumstances, or even bad karma from the past, we are unknowingly handing over the power to transform our suffering to forces outside ourselves. We become passive participants in our own lives, like leaves drifting helplessly in a raging river. And thus, the karmic loop, the endless repetition of ignorance, resentment, and unconscious reaction, continues from one lifetime to the next. Understanding karma is not about resignation, it's about responsibility. Many people feel burdened when they hear the word karma. It sounds like a verdict from the past that must be endured. But in the teachings of the Buddha, karma is never meant to weigh us down in despair. On the contrary, it is a profound invitation to awaken, to see that we are the ones creating the stream of karma through every thought, word, and action we engage in. And if we are the ones creating it, then we also have the power to pause, to transform, and to begin planting a new path. A Zen master once said, "Whatever happens in your life is not for blame, it's a call to awaken." When someone hurts us, instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" we might gently ask, "Why am I reacting this way? What unhealed part of me is being touched?" Because the truth is, no one can make us suffer unless the seed of suffering is already within us. A touching story of karmic healing. This is the story of a man named Ethan, a son who carried deep resentment toward his parents for most of his life. As a child, Ethan had often felt unloved. His parents were cold, emotionally distant, and frequently compared him to his siblings. He grew up believing he was not good enough, not worthy of love. That childhood wound followed him into adulthood. Without realizing it, Ethan kept repeating the same karmic pattern in his relationships, with lovers, friends, and coworkers. He felt rejected, misunderstood, and emotionally starved. And in his heart, Ethan sat with his pain, not to analyze it, but simply to feel it. He saw himself not just as the wounded child, but also as the grown man who had never truly met his own suffering with compassion. And slowly, he began to see his parents differently, not as villains, but as people shaped by their own wounds. They, too, had grown up in difficult times, under the weight of trauma, poverty, and emotional neglect. They simply hadn't known how to love, because no one had ever taught them. Ethan wept, not from pain, but from a deep release. For the first time in his life, he no longer blamed his parents. And in that moment, something miraculous happened. The suffering vanished. Not because the past had changed, but because his relationship to it had. The story of blame dissolved into the silence of understanding. And in that silence, Ethan stepped out of the karmic loop by refusing to feed it with more resentment. Understanding karma is a path to liberation, not a prison of the past. We can't change the past. We can't rewrite our childhood or undo the mistakes we've made. But we can stop here. We can stop perpetuating the same seeds of suffering. We can begin again by planting new seeds of awareness, compassion, and responsibility. When we stop blaming, we stop identifying as victims of fate. We become the ones who light the torch of our own inner freedom. And that is the first step to breaking the cycle of suffering, not just across lifetimes, but right here in this very moment. Part 7. The truth of the cessation of suffering. Freedom is possible. 7.1. The most unshakable belief. Suffering is not eternal. Among the very first words the Buddha spoke after his enlightenment was a statement that shook the spiritual and philosophical world of the East. Suffering can come to a complete end. It may sound simple today, but thousands of years ago, and even in our present time, this teaching remains revolutionary. Before the Buddha, many spiritual traditions even saw suffering as a form of eternal punishment, a karmic sentence from which no soul could ever escape. People were born to suffer, to repent. Suffering has a cause, and because it has a cause, it can end. This is the heart of Nirodha, the third noble truth, where the Buddha not only reveals the truth about suffering. Suffering is fate. If we look back at human history, from ancient times to modern days, we'll find a recurring pattern, a deep fear of suffering and a tendency to view it as fate. Many believe that suffering must be endured, tolerated, and accepted, as if it were an inseparable part of being human. If someone is born into poverty or misfortune, it's often said to be God's will, or just how life is. Suffering becomes not just an experience, but an identity, something inevitable and unchangeable. And from this belief emerges one of the most powerful chains that bind the human spirit: hopelessness. When you believe that suffering is eternal, what is there to hope for? What reason is there to strive, to grow, to transform? When people lose faith in the possibility of ending suffering, they live as if they've already surrendered. They lose the motivation to change, the curiosity to understand themselves, and the yearning for inner freedom. Their hearts grow numb, cold, and resigned. But what they don't realize is this: it's not the suffering itself, but this mistaken belief that suffering is permanent, that truly imprisons them. The Dharma, a light revealing the way out. That's why, when the Buddha declared that suffering can end, he didn't just offer a philosophical truth. He lit a flame of hope in the hearts of humanity. The Buddha did not deny suffering. He did not run from it. He named it clearly. But unlike earlier belief systems, he did not see suffering as a punishment or a stain to erase. He looked into it directly, analyzed it deeply, and taught that suffering arises from causes. And because there are causes, when those causes cease, suffering dissolves. This is the core message of the third noble truth. It doesn't ask us to cling to blind faith or to wait for salvation from above. Instead, it asks us to look with wisdom and realize All suffering arises from somewhere, and we, ourselves, a radical contrast to ancient worldviews. In many ancient civilizations, especially those rooted in doctrines of punishment and reward, humans were taught that suffering was the price for sin. The Buddha's message was nothing short of revolutionary. He taught that no one is punishing us. It is karma, in motion. He taught that no wrongdoing is eternal, if we understand, see clearly, and stop fueling it. He taught that no suffering is irreversible, if we are willing to turn inward and observe our own minds. Buddhism doesn't aim to make people fearful, it awakens them. It helps them see that suffering is not destiny, and that freedom is not far away. It's real, and it's within reach. Cause and effect, the foundation of transformational faith. Only after deeply understanding karma, as discussed in earlier parts, can we truly embrace the third noble truth. If karma is the cause, then its effect is dukkha, suffering. But here's the beautiful truth. If we stop planting those causes, the effects will stop too. Karma is not fixed. It is not a life sentence. It is the accumulation of mental habits, and habits can be changed. When we stop feeding greed, hatred, and delusion, when we practice mindfulness, when we live with sila, ethics, samadhi, concentration, and panna, wisdom, the old seeds will wither from lack of nourishment. New seeds of compassion, clarity, and awareness will take root. And so, the fruits of suffering will slowly fade, opening the door to nibbana. When we realize that suffering is not eternal, we begin to believe in peace again. This peace isn't the absence of life. It is the presence of a mind no longer ruled by craving, aversion, and ignorance. That is nibbana, the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice. If we walk the path wisely, we can touch the edges of inner freedom. 7.2. What is nibbana? Don't mistake it for a place. When people hear the word nibbana, most, including even long-standing Buddhist practitioners, unconsciously imagine it as a place, a distant heaven, a mythical promised land where suffering ends and beings rest forever, never to be reborn. In their minds, nibbana resembles some invisible realm where the awakened abide for eternity after death. But that is a major misunderstanding. The Buddha never taught that nibbana is a location, and certainly not a post-death reward. Nibbana does not exist out there, does not wait in the future, and does not require any divine granting. Nibbana is not a place, it is a state of mind. It is a real state, one that can be directly experienced here and now. If the mind is no longer bound by greed, hatred, and delusion. A place or a state. Just as hell is a mind state born of hatred, and heaven a state of craving. Both are creations of the unenlightened mind, still trapped in samsara, driven by desire, illusion, and ego. But nibbana is entirely different. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha states, "Monks, there is something unproduced, unconditioned, unmade, unformed. If that were not, there would be no escape from production, from conditioned becoming. But because there is something unproduced, unconditioned, unmade, unformed, there is an escape from production and conditioned becoming. This unproduced, undegraded is nibbana. It is not fabricated by human hands, does not arise from matter, is not conferred, and does not vanish with time. Nibbana is a reality beyond birth and death, a reality beyond all notions of space and time. The fire that has gone out, an illuminating metaphor. One allegory often used by the Buddha to describe nibbana is a flame that has extinguished, not because someone doused it, not because it vanished magically, but because there was no more fuel to sustain it. Similarly, the mind is like a burning fire. The fuels are greed, hatred, and delusion. When these three fuels are exhausted, the mind naturally becomes calm, serene, and no longer consumed by suffering. That very state, the absence of the fire of klesha, mental affliction, is called nibbana. Nibbana is not bestowed by a higher power. It naturally arises when the mind ceases to nurture ignorance. It does not come from outside. It exists the moment we stop. Nibbana in the teachings of the Buddha and the meditation masters. In many suttas, when monks ask, "Venerable Sir, what is nibbana?" the Buddha often responds with meaningful silence. Because nibbana cannot be defined by words. Any definition would imprison it inside a concept, yet nibbana is not a concept. It is direct experience. However, in some texts, the Buddha describes nibbana using powerful attributes. Nibbana is immortal, absolutely calm, the end of craving, hatred, and delusion, the farther shore. The supreme happiness. Ajahn Chah, a renowned Thai meditation master, once said, "Nibbana is not far away. It is present the moment the mind is no longer attached. But because we refuse to stop, refuse to let go, we cannot see it." Another meditation teacher said, "Nibbana is like a wide-open, cool room where nothing needs changing. We do nothing, just stop stirring it up." Two kinds of nibbana, in life and after liberation. In Buddhism, nibbana is commonly divided into two. Nibbana with residue, upadesisa nibbana. The state of an awakened person who is still alive, like the Buddha after enlightenment. They still walk, eat, and engage with life, but their mind is no longer disturbed by suffering, by mental fabrications or attachments. Though the body may age or fall ill, their mind remains unshaken. This is nibbana in life. Final nibbana, upadesisa nibbana. When an arahant or the Buddha passes away, there is no body to be reborn, no consciousness to continue, no attachment to phenomena. This nibbana signifies the total end of all suffering conditions, an absolute stillness. Yet, the crucial point is not to wait for final nibbana after death. Instead, we must realize that nibbana can be touched in this life, through proper practice and application. Nibbana is not distant, exotic, or unrealistic. Many hear the word nibbana and think it is something lofty, far removed, reserved for monastics or arahants. But the truth is, anyone can experience glimpses of nibbana, right here, right now, in each conscious breath. When you let go of a long-held resentment, don't you feel lighter? When you no longer crave unnecessary desires, don't you feel more at peace? When your mind, though only for a moment, becomes calm, not pulled by past or pushed by future, don't you feel free? That is the taste of nibbana. Nibbana does not require death. It is present the moment we stop, observe, release, and return to our pure mind. In summary, nibbana, a natural state of mind. When the clouds of afflictive emotions clear, the sky of consciousness becomes clear. When the fire of greed, hatred, and delusion subsides, the heart becomes cool and spacious. When we are no longer pulled by past or driven by future, the present moment becomes whole and complete. That is nibbana, not a place, not a reward, not something far away, but something very near, if only we are willing to return. This is why the Buddha called it the supreme happiness, not because it gratifies desire, but because it puts an end to all causes of suffering. A happiness that needs no conditions, depends on nothing, and never fades, because it arises the moment we stop and see the truth. 3. When the mind stops burning itself, experiencing nibbana in daily life. There is a real story, quiet, but powerful enough to touch the heart of anyone struggling with suffering. She was a middle-aged woman named Eliza. For nearly 30 years, Eliza had lived through an unending series of tragedies, abused by her biological father as a child, then married to a drug-addicted and abusive husband. After the divorce, she raised 2 children alone in poverty, struggling to survive day by day. Deep inside, she never truly lived. She even tried sleeping pills to sleep forever, but stopped, for the sake of her children. And so, life dragged on, until one winter night. She sat alone in her worn-down room. Her children were asleep. She was exhausted after a long day of labor. Her mind spun with fatigue, loneliness, and a deep sense of uselessness. Suddenly, a space opened up between her thoughts. It wasn't a miraculous light or a divine voice. It was just, her mind stopped. It stopped chasing, stopped resenting, stopped screaming in silence. She simply sat there, still, expecting nothing. Or love. It came from the simple fact that nothing inside her was burning anymore. The moment passed, but it left an indelible mark. From that point on, Eliza began to explore meditation, discovered mindfulness, and gradually learned to live with a quieter mind. Not because her life improved, but because the war inside her had quieted. Eliza's story is not a fairy tale. It is a real-life example of what the Buddha once taught. Suffering can cease. Life can be lived differently. Nibbana, the absence of burning. Not a mystical miracle. Many still imagine Nibbana as something extraordinary, mystical, reserved only for saints or reclusive forest monks. But what they don't realize is this. In moments like Eliza's, when the mind stops burning itself, there is already a fleeting experience of Nibbana. In the suttas, the Buddha called Nibbana the extinguishing of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's it. Not a place. Not a fantasy. A state in which the mind is no longer set ablaze by suffering. Imagine walking through a scorching desert, parched, barefoot, and burning under the sun. Suddenly, you step into the cool shade. Not because you gained anything, but because you're no longer being scorched. That is the nature of Nibbana, not the presence of something new, but the absence of what was causing pain. Eliza didn't attain full Nibbana, but in that moment when her mind stopped resisting, clinging, and blaming, she tasted the flavor of freedom, of Nibbana, if only briefly. Nibbana doesn't come from somewhere. It reveals itself when what obscures it falls away. We often ask, when will I attain Nibbana? But the better question might be, what am I holding on to that keeps me from seeing Nibbana? Nibbana is not something to arrive in the future. It is always present, simply obscured by the dense clouds of greed, hatred, and delusion. We seek Nibbana as if searching for the sun in the night, without realizing the sun was never gone. It's just hidden. So, the path isn't about gaining anything. It's about letting go of what covers the light. The more we release, the clearer it shines. The more we stop, the more stillness appears. Why do deep meditators, or those who face great tragedies, touch deeper layers of the mind? That's why, after major life events, losing a loved one, betrayal, bankruptcy, many people find themselves strangely silent inside, as if all striving suddenly becomes meaningless. But for those who are mindful, it is an opening, a chance to see. I am not all the things I've clung to. Meditators go through something similar. After hours of sitting, legs aching, the body screaming, the mind spinning, eventually, exhaustion wins. The struggle stops. And then, something opens. Not emptiness, but a pure presence free of grasping. In both cases, what becomes clear is this. Nibbana does not come from adding more, but from letting go. Nibbana isn't something extra. It's what remains when nothing extra is needed. We often think freedom means having more money, more love, more understanding. But the more we add, the heavier the mind becomes. In contrast, Nibbana is not about addition, but subtraction. Less craving, less attachment, less resistance, less aversion, less delusion. The Buddha once likened Nibbana to the ocean when the winds cease and the surface becomes still, no longer stirred by the waves of illusion. The ocean is still the ocean, but no longer turbulent. In deep meditation, one might reach such a level of stillness that there is nothing left to hold on to. That feeling cannot be described in words. It can only be known as something absent, yet wholly complete. That is the taste of Nibbana. Conclusion: this state is not fantasy. It can be cultivated through right practice. Don't think of Nibbana as something distant or unattainable. Anyone, living in the world, amidst chaos, amidst pain, can touch Nibbana when the mind learns to pause, to release, and to return inward. Nibbana is not magic. It is a natural law. When the fire has no more fuel, it goes out. When the mind is no longer burning with greed, anger, and delusion, suffering ends. And in that very silence, peace emerges. You don't have to chase Nibbana far away. Just stop. Look deeply. Let go. Every such moment is a seed of Nibbana being planted in your heart. 7. 4. The third noble truth is not escaping suffering, but seeing through it to be free. When we talk about the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, Nirodha, many people mistakenly believe that the path the Buddha taught is one of escape. Ending suffering sounds to some like suppressing emotions, detaching from life, or even entering a numb, indifferent state where there's no pain, but also no joy. Some imagine that true liberation requires leaving the world behind, hiding in a forest, or withdrawing from society. But in reality, it's quite the opposite. The Buddha never taught us to run from suffering. He never encouraged denial or suppression of human experience. What he emphasized instead is this: to see deeply into the very nature of suffering, to look straight into its core without turning away, so that we can let go of its roots. Avoidance is not freedom. When faced with pain, loss, or disappointment, our natural reaction is often to avoid it, by drowning ourselves in work, binge scrolling social media, indulging in distractions, or even turning to spirituality as a form of escape. But the truth is, avoiding suffering doesn't make it go away. It just buries it deeper inside. Someone might meditate daily, chant mantras, live in a monastery, or read hundreds of spiritual books. But if anger, attachment, jealousy, or fear still control their mind, you return to the world, to the very place where suffering lives, to help others see that freedom is possible. Because suffering isn't something to be escaped from, it's something to be understood. And the light of wisdom doesn't come from hiding, but from being fully present in life and looking deeply into each experience without clinging. To see deeply isn't to overthink or analyze. It's to observe with stillness and clarity. When we watch our anger without reacting or repressing it, we may discover a fear behind it. When we notice a craving without immediately following it, we may sense the emptiness it tries to fill. This clear seeing is, in itself, liberating. It arises naturally as the result of an inner journey through the first two truths. When you see suffering clearly, not just intellectually, but in real life. Nirvana is not after death, it can arise now. Many people think of nirvana as a mystical place one reaches only after death. But the Buddha made it clear, nirvana is a state of mind, not a physical destination. It can arise right here, right now, the moment the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion no longer burn in your mind. Imagine a moment when you're overwhelmed with anxiety. No one can give you nirvana. You must practice for yourself. The end of suffering doesn't come from praying, blind faith, or waiting for a miracle. It comes from direct understanding and consistent daily practice. Every time you sit in stillness and observe your breath, you plant the seeds of nirvana. Every time you notice anger arise and choose not to act on it, you're walking the path to freedom. Every time you choose compassion over control, you break the cycle of suffering. A journey no one can walk for you. If the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, is a declaration that suffering can truly end, an walkable path, one that we can live and apply in every breath, every word, every action in our daily lives. That path is called the Noble Eightfold Path, 8 wholesome elements, 8 mindful ways of living, each guiding us out of ignorance and into wisdom, out of suffering and into peace. The most important thing to understand, this is not abstract theory, nor a rigid list of moral commandments. The Eightfold Path doesn't live in scriptures or intellectual debate. It lives in the choices you make every single day. It's not a practice for monks and nuns. It's a way of life for anyone who wishes to understand suffering, face it directly, and step out of its grip. Though it has 8 components, the path isn't a checklist to complete. It's an interconnected whole, where each element supports and nourishes the others, like links in a single chain. Let's begin with the group called wisdom, which includes right view and right intention. Wisdom is the starting point for any real transformation. If you don't see things clearly, then no matter how hard you try, you'll only keep running in circles. Right view is the ability to see life as it truly is, to recognize that suffering exists, that it has causes, and that it doesn't come from others, but from the mind's own reactivity and clinging. It's the insight that everything is impermanent, nothing truly belongs to us. And suffering arises when we resist that truth. With right view, your entire perspective shifts. You stop blaming others for your pain, and instead begin to see the deeper patterns that fuel it. From right view comes right intention, the wholesome motivations that arise from wisdom. These are intentions rooted in compassion, non-harming, and letting go. They are not about suppressing desire or emotion, but about consciously choosing to turn your heart in a direction that brings peace, both to yourself and to others. When your actions spring from a place of kindness, when you respond to difficulty with understanding instead of revenge, you're already walking the path of wisdom. But in Buddhism, Ethics isn't about punishment or reward. It's about protecting yourself from unnecessary suffering. If you lie, you may deceive others, but you can't deceive your own unease. If you act out of greed or harm, you might gain something temporarily, but you will lose your inner peace. When you live with integrity, you sleep better, breathe easier, and stop fearing the truth. Right speech means speaking truthfully, kindly, and meaningfully. It means avoiding lies, divisive talk, harsh words, and gossip. Right action is acting in ways that do not harm, refraining from killing, stealing, or causing harm through sexuality. Right livelihood means earning your living in a way that does not support suffering. That means no deceit, no exploitation, no selling of harm. When your words, actions, and work arise from understanding and compassion, you are living the ethical dimension of the path in a complete and vibrant way. The final group is mental discipline, which includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These are the tools that help you steady the mind and stay centered amidst the ever-changing world. Right effort is not about pushing yourself until exhaustion. It's about consistently nurturing the good within you, gently and persistently. It's the quiet repetition of healthy habits, done not for achievement, but because you've seen their value. Right mindfulness is the cornerstone, the ability to know what's happening in your body, your mind, and your surroundings, without getting carried away. When you eat and know you're eating, when you're angry and know you're angry, when you breathe and know you're breathing, that's mindfulness. It's not control, it's awareness. Not suppression, but presence. Right concentration is stable attention, a collected, undistracted mind that can stay steady regardless of external noise. It's not about entering a deep trance or escaping life, but about being fully present. When you can focus without restlessness, when you can be with someone and truly be there, not lost in thoughts, that is right concentration in daily life. All 8 elements of the path work together. Wisdom gives you vision, ethics gives you direction, and mental discipline gives you balance. If you have understanding without practice, you're just collecting concepts. If you practice without mindfulness, your actions become mechanical. Only when all 3 work together do you begin to walk the path of inner freedom. Freedom not because life becomes perfect, but because your heart is no longer entangled in its chaos. And perhaps the most vital truth is this: no one can walk this path for you. You can be inspired, guided, even supported, but every step must still be your own. No Buddha can hand you enlightenment. No teaching can transform you if you don't live it. The path only becomes clear when you begin walking. When you choose to live a little more mindfully today than yesterday, you're already walking it. When you pause before reacting in anger and choose to respond with clarity instead, you're walking it. When you stop chasing perfection and start embracing what is, you're already on the Eightfold Path. In the next section, we'll go deeper into these 3 essential foundations: wisdom, ethics, and mental discipline, not to learn more theory, but to see how these principles can truly come alive in your everyday life. 8.2. 3 roots that nurture freedom: wisdom, virtue, concentration. When you first look at the Noble Eightfold Path, it might seem like 8 separate directions, each a different practice. But in reality, they're deeply interwoven, like branches stemming from one living tree. If the Eightfold Path is the tree that leads us toward inner freedom, then it is firmly rooted in 3 essential foundations: wisdom, panna, virtue, sila, and concentration, samadhi. These aren't just practice categories. They are layers of transformation that build upon each other. If you understand suffering but don't live ethically, you'll contradict yourself. If you follow precepts without understanding why, they become rigid moral codes. If you meditate without grounding in wisdom and virtue, your stillness may be superficial, not liberating. Only when all 3 stand firm, right understanding. It's the capacity to see clearly, without the filters of illusion, emotion, or bias. In the Eightfold Path, wisdom is expressed through right view and right intention, but as personal responsibility for our actions and their consequences. Right intention is about directing your thoughts in wholesome ways, toward compassion, letting go, and non-harming. It means not allowing anger to dictate your decisions, not letting greed shape your behavior, and not letting delusion fog your mind. Wisdom doesn't require intellectual brilliance. It begins in the simplest moments, when you pause in anger and ask, is this reaction helping or hurting me? When you realize that others aren't making you suffer, it's your clinging, your expectations, your stories that do. And the beautiful truth is this: anyone can cultivate wisdom, regardless of education, background, or belief system. 2. Clear and unburdened. Virtue includes 3 factors on the Eightfold Path: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Right speech means speaking the truth, speaking with kindness, and speaking in ways that bring harmony. One careless word can wound someone deeply and haunt your own conscience. On the other hand, one sincere sentence can lift a person from despair. Right action is about living without harming, refraining from killing, stealing, or engaging in sexual misconduct. Every small action, when done with mindfulness and kindness, becomes a brick in the foundation of peace. Right livelihood means earning your living in ways that do not harm others. If your job requires deception, exploitation, or cruelty, a virtuous life doesn't arise from fear of punishment, but from the deep realization that harming others is, in the end, harming ourselves. 3. Concentration. A steady mind is the ground of liberation. Concentration doesn't mean forcing your mind into silence. It means being fully present, undistracted by the past or future, undisturbed by praise or blame. A concentrated mind is calm, not because nothing stirs it, but because it no longer clings or resists. This category includes 3 factors: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right effort is balanced effort, not burning out, not giving up, but consistently nurturing the wholesome and abandoning the unwholesome. You don't need to meditate 10 hours a day. Just being aware when anger arises and choosing not to feed it, that's effort. Right mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your body, your thoughts, and your feelings without being swept away. When you wash dishes, just wash dishes. When you eat, just eat. When you listen, don't wait to reply, just listen. That's mindfulness. Right concentration is deep mental focus, not by zoning out, but by gathering your mind and staying centered. A concentrated person still feels sadness and joy, but doesn't drown in them. A calm and focused mind becomes the natural result, like a lake settling when the wind dies down. This is not self-discipline, it's self-honesty. Wisdom, virtue, concentration aren't boxes to check or ideals to chase. They are 3 ways of being that nurture each other, starting with seeing clearly, followed by living ethically, and culminating in inner stillness. Conclusion: 3 pillars. 1. Awaken life. Wisdom helps you understand suffering. Virtue ensures you don't create more suffering. Concentration helps you stay steady amid suffering. When all 3 are present, your life stops chasing the external and begins returning inward, to a place of freedom no one can give or take away. And now, we're ready to move into the final part of this path, a real-life story of someone who practiced this and watched their life quietly transform. 8.3. Looking back after 1 year. I'm no longer who I was, thanks to one small thing. Daniel wasn't a monk. He wasn't a meditation master or a spiritual seeker. He was just a regular office worker in a busy city, waking up at 6 a.m. to join the morning traffic, coming home at 7 p.m. exhausted, with barely enough energy left to eat, let alone improve himself or meditate deeply, like the book said. Daniel used to be easily irritated. He snapped when tired, said harsh things without meaning to. He felt like he was always running, always lacking, always disconnected from himself. Then one day, after a pointless argument with his wife over who should take out the trash, Daniel decided to make a change, but not a dramatic one. He started with one very small thing. Each morning, before checking his phone, he would spend 5 minutes just sitting and breathing. That was it. No complicated techniques. No meditation apps. Just the simple act of returning to his breath, breathing in and knowing he was breathing in, breathing out and knowing he was breathing out. Week 1. Nothing's changing. In the first week, Daniel felt like he was doing something pointless. His mind was all over the place. Work, emails, news headlines, swirling nonstop. But he had made a promise to himself, so he kept going. Then one morning, when his son spilled milk on his freshly cleaned shirt, "I'll help you clean it up," his wife was surprised. He was surprised. It was the first time Daniel realized that something had begun shifting inside. By month 3, a new kind of stillness. After 3 months, Daniel still meditated just 5 minutes every morning. But now, he also started practicing awareness of emotions throughout the day. Daniel discovered an inner stillness, a space between emotion and reaction, where he could choose his next move instead of being a slave to old habits. By month 6, no one noticed, but inside, everything had changed. To most people, Daniel looked the same, still the funny IT guy at work. But Daniel knew something important had changed. Life no longer felt like a never-ending race. I'm still me, but not the old me. 1 year later, when Daniel looked back, he didn't have a list of grand achievements. No awards, no spiritual breakthroughs, no enlightenment. But he was no longer reacting automatically, no longer stuck in his default mode, no longer distant from himself. And the part that touched him most deeply. Just 5 minutes each morning had opened a door to a more awake, aware, and free inner life, where suffering still existed, but no longer held him captive. There was only consistency, with one small action. There was only an ordinary person, in an ordinary life, who chose to give himself a small moment of mindfulness each day. And that small act, as quiet as a drop of water falling each morning, slowly wore down his harsh reactions, deep-seated habits, and hidden fears, until what emerged was a gentler, more spacious, more authentic self. From Daniel to you, this journey isn't just to be watched, but lived. If someone like Daniel, with little time, no deep knowledge of Buddhism, and nothing special, could transform his life through one small habit, then so can you. The real question isn't, do I have the right conditions to practice? The real question is, am I willing to begin, just one small step, starting today? Because the moment you take that first step, you're no longer standing still. And your journey of awakening, your own unique, sincere journey, has already begun. Part 9, From Suffering to Liberation. The story of the awakening journey of ordinary people. 9.1, A quiet cracking. When the life you call happy no longer feels like it. Daniel was an entirely ordinary man. Not outstanding, but not struggling either. He had a stable office job, enough income to get by. He would nod without hesitation, I guess so. But for a long time, Daniel had been living like a machine. Waking up on time, rushing to drop his daughter off at school, then plunging into the daily grind. A quick lunch, finishing work at 5, heading home, eating dinner, showering, and scrolling through his phone until late at night. His rest came from binge-watching Netflix alone or mindlessly browsing social media, not to relax, but to escape a nameless, silent emptiness. He would snap at his daughter over trivial things, not because he was physically alone, but because he no longer knew what he was living for. It was a quiet, persistent weariness, not enough to be called a crisis, but enough to slowly erode his spirit day after day. Then one afternoon, something happened. Not a major accident, not a terminal illness, just a final meeting at work. He quietly packed his belongings and left the building like a shadow. On the way home, he slowed down, perhaps for the first time in years, to really look at the streets he traveled every day. At a red light, he glanced into the rearview mirror and saw his own reflection, lost, drained, lifeless. That evening, while washing dishes, his young daughter suddenly asked, "Dad, why are your eyes sad even when you smile?" That innocent question pierced through the armor Daniel had built over the years. He froze. A plate slipped from his hand into the sink. And this, not okay, had been quietly growing inside him for years. He just didn't have the courage to face it. It was the first moment of awakening. No thunder. No blinding light. No divine revelation. Employee. He had tried so hard to live correctly by society's standards that he forgot how to live authentically. He had everything people associate with happiness, yet he no longer felt any real joy. And in that moment, Daniel understood, suffering doesn't always come from grand tragedies. Sometimes, it's the slow, daily erosion of the soul, when we lose connection with ourselves, when things that once sparked joy become lifeless routines. From then on, Daniel stopped pretending. He didn't try to sugarcoat things or distract himself. He began to observe his suffering with a level of honesty he had never allowed before. And that was the first real step toward transformation. Everything in Daniel seemed to slow down. He was no longer the man frantically chasing schedules. Instead, he started sitting still, not in some formal meditation posture, but simply sitting with himself. No phone, no music, no distractions, just silence and observation. And strangely enough, it was precisely in that doing nothing that he began to see, truly see. He saw layers of fatigue that had built up over the years, not just from work, but from the deep, unspoken need to be acknowledged. Daniel began journaling. Just a few lines each night. Nothing fancy, just scattered thoughts. Why did I get angry today? What am I really afraid of? Why do I always feel like I'm not enough? Gradually, from those scattered lines, deeper patterns began to emerge. He saw old expectations he had carried since childhood, the need to be smart, strong, and responsible. He recognized his tendency to compare himself silently to colleagues and friends, making every small failure feel like a crisis. And he realized how much he tried to control everything, and how terrified he felt when life didn't go as planned. All these things, like small, invisible thorns, had pierced his spirit over the years. And now, for the first time, he was beginning to feel how deeply they hurt. One afternoon, while sitting alone at a park, he ran into an old friend who happened to be passing by. They chatted briefly. The friend asked, "How have you been lately?" Daniel almost said, "I'm fine," out of habit. But he paused, took a breath, not to give up, but to listen to what you really need. That one sentence, so simple, was like the last drop that overflowed the glass. Not because it was profound, but because it came at just the right time. It felt like life itself was gently nodding, whispering, "Yes, stop." And finally, look within. From that day on, Daniel stopped pretending to be okay. He allowed himself to feel sad, to feel confused. But within that sadness and confusion, for the first time, he didn't feel afraid, because he knew he was finally being honest. He began to understand something crucial. If we never dare to look directly at our suffering, we'll never understand why we suffer. It's like someone with a wound. No matter how much they bandage it from the outside, healing won't happen until they look inside and truly see the injury. Transformation doesn't begin with action. It begins with honesty, with being real, with daring to sit in silence with the parts of ourselves we've always avoided. And in that moment, even though so much was still unclear, Daniel felt something, small, but unmistakably real, begin to open inside. Not an answer, but a doorway, a sliver of light, a direction. He no longer needed someone to blame. He no longer expected someone to save him. He knew, if there's a path out of suffering, it starts right here, in the depths of his own heart. And so, he continued walking. This time, not to run away from suffering, but to understand it. 9.3. A small ray of light. Believing that suffering is not forever. After spending days quietly sitting with himself, Daniel no longer panicked when faced with the emptiness inside. Instead of trying to fill it with work, entertainment, or rational explanations, he began to observe, gently, without forcing anything to happen, without demanding change. He simply stayed present. And from that seemingly barren space, something very small began to grow. Daniel didn't set lofty goals. He just tried a few simple things, like someone learning to live again. Each morning, instead of grabbing his phone or rushing into a to-do list, he sat still for 5 minutes. No formal meditation. No technique. Just sitting, listening to his breath, feeling the breeze through the window. At first, his mind was still chaotic. But day by day, the fog within began to lift, subtly, gently. He started jotting down his emotions each night. Not long diary entries. Just one question: how do I feel today? Sometimes it was lonely, sometimes grateful, sometimes numb. Then one evening, after a long, stressful day, his daughter spilled a glass of water on the floor. Normally, he would have snapped. But this time, he exhaled and gently said, "Just be more careful next time, okay?" His daughter looked at him in surprise, then smiled. That moment wasn't dramatic, but it moved Daniel deeply. He realized he had reacted differently, not by suppression, but because there was more space inside, less tension, less need to control. Right then, he understood something profound. Nirvana isn't a distant mystical realm reserved for saints. It's the moment when one is no longer bound by craving, anger, or ignorance, right in the heart of ordinary life. It's not a permanent state of bliss. It's 1 minute of calm in the chaos. It's being able to sit with yourself without fear. It's choosing gentleness instead of reacting, but an inner knowing. If today feels lighter than yesterday, if I can sit quietly for 5 minutes, if I can pause instead of yelling, then maybe suffering isn't permanent. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer felt trapped in his own life. He didn't need to escape externally. A path was opening within, softly, slowly, but steadily. Real and reachable, in the middle of his imperfect, everyday life. 9.4. The journey begins, step by step, toward awakening. After those fleeting moments of feeling lighter than yesterday, from within, he chose one simple thing: daily mindfulness practice. Not long meditations or retreats in the mountains. Just 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night. Putting his phone aside, he felt like he wasn't making any progress and was tempted to give up. But instead of beating himself up, he learned to return, gently, like a friend returning to someone they care about. No explanation needed. Alongside meditation, he began to write down one thing he was grateful for each night. Sometimes a good cup of tea, sometimes the tender gaze of his daughter. Small but real things. Those written lines reminded him that joy hadn't disappeared. He had just stopped noticing. Daniel also found a Buddhist podcast, not too heavy on doctrine, but like a gentle voice reminding him to slow down, see clearly, and be kind to himself. At first, all of it seemed fragmented, but after a few months, he realized he was no longer the same man. He didn't react impulsively to everything. There was a pause between emotion and action, a quiet space of witnessing. One evening, while washing dishes, just needing to truly be present in that moment. That night, he wrote in his journal, "I'm no longer who I used to be. Not because I've changed my life." The quiet observing that allowed him to move toward awakening, not in blinding light, but in a warmth just bright enough to see his next step. And he came to understand something profound. This journey isn't reserved for the few. It's not just for those with free time or spiritual potential. Anyone can begin from their own suffering, from a quiet morning of simply sitting. It's about coming home to yourself more fully and peacefully. Part 10. Conclusion. The Four Noble Truths are not a philosophy, but a way of life. 10. 1. A map of the mind for those who feel lost. There's a simple truth that often gets overlooked. The Four Noble Truths are not a lofty philosophy meant for debate and unsure where to turn. When you find yourself lost among countless choices, when you wake up each morning unsure of what you're living for, when your smile becomes more of a mask than a feeling, when you quietly wonder, is this really all life has to offer? That's when this map is gently waiting for you to open it. The Four Noble Truths don't ask for your belief. They invite your attention to look at your own suffering without judgment, to examine its roots without blaming others, to glimpse the possibility of transformation, not as some far-off dream, but as something real and attainable. And then, step by step, not forced, not pressured, you walk the path of mindfulness, learning to understand yourself, others, and slowly releasing the knots that keep you from living authentically. You don't have to become a monk. You don't have to leave your job, your family, or the world. You only need one thing. I've been running so long that I don't even know where I'm going. The moment you can be truthful about your own suffering, without denial, without justification, but to the quiet spaces within yourself. And then, something shifts in your understanding. Suffering is not a failure. It's not something to be erased. It's a signal, a message calling you to pause, return, and begin something more real, more grounded, more meaningful. Many people think awakening or enlightenment is a distant concept, something reserved for ascetics, monks. Energized or exhausted, anyone can open this map if they're humble enough to look within. Why? Because suffering does not discriminate, and therefore, the path out of suffering is open to all. The Four Noble Truths won't promise that you'll stop suffering overnight, but they point out this: if you keep living the same way, chasing, clinging, resisting, blaming, suffering will continue. But if you begin to live with awareness, to return to yourself, to learn how to understand and love with wisdom, then, step by step, you begin to free yourself from the cycles of unconscious pain that have ruled your life for so long. A map doesn't walk the path for you, but it gives you direction. It helps you stop walking in circles. And it gives you hope. Hope that there's another way to live, a different rhythm, a truer version of you waiting to emerge. And just like any map, it only works when you stop and look. When you're still running, after success, after expectations, after the image of who you think you need to be, you can't see the real path. But the moment you pause and meet your suffering with honesty, no longer pretending, no longer performing, that's when the map begins to unfold. Line by line, suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path to freedom. Not something brand new, just truths you've always known, but never fully paused to notice. Sometimes, what exhausts us isn't how long the road is, but that we're walking it without knowing where we're going. And with a map, sometimes all it takes is a few steps in the right direction, and your whole experience begins to change. Don't be afraid to realize you're lost, because the moment you see it, that's the beginning of waking up. Being lost isn't as dangerous as believing you're on the right path when you're not. And suffering, strangely enough, can be the gift that helps you stop, check your direction, and begin a new journey, slower, more authentic, and deeply human. 10. The only thing he did was point the way, and somehow that was enough. Over 2,000 years ago, on the night of his enlightenment, a human being, not a god, not a superhero, looked deeply into his own suffering and into the suffering of all living beings. From that, he didn't build a dogma. He didn't construct a belief system. He simply shared what he had seen. Suffering is real. Its causes are real. The end of suffering is possible, and there is a path of practice that leads to freedom. He never forced anyone to believe. He never used authority to persuade. He simply said, I am only one who shows the way. That path, no one else can walk it for you. No one can breathe for you. No one else can feel the ache in your chest or the emptiness after another sleepless night. No one truly knows what it is you long for, what confuses you, what you're still resisting. And so, no one else can free you but yourself. But this truth isn't something to fear. In fact, it might be the most empowering thing of all. Returning to themselves and beginning to live with awareness. You might fail. You might forget where you're going. You might lose your way again and again, circling back to old patterns. But the map is still there. The path is still there. The light never disappears. It's only hidden by your own hurried steps. And when you pause, breathe, and look deeply, that light reappears. It doesn't come from outside. It arises from within you. No one gives you clarity. It's only when you stop running, sit still, and touch your own experience that you realize the light has always been there, quiet but unwavering. Enlightenment is not reserved for the exceptional few. It is deeply human, utterly simple, and already within reach. It is the capacity to see your suffering clearly without turning away, to take one slow, honest step toward peace. You don't have to become someone else. You only need to fully show up for your own life. Mindfulness is not a mystical technique. Practice isn't something distant. It might start with putting down your phone while eating, with noticing the first breath of the day before the rush begins, with one moment of anger where, rather than reacting, you pause, breathe. You've been walking toward it, one conscious step at a time, each time you return to yourself. You won't need to be rescued anymore, because you'll have seen. It's nothing grand or tragic, just a sleepless night, staring at the ceiling, sensing a hollow ache within. For others, it's sitting at dinner with family, hearing their child ask, "Are you happy?" and not knowing how to answer. Or standing in a noisy crowd, surrounded by laughter, and suddenly feeling completely alone. We don't always wake up with a thunderclap. Sometimes, it happens in the quietest of moments. But if it's real, it's enough. That moment when you stop pretending that everything's okay. When you no longer run after every distraction just to avoid feeling the emptiness growing inside. That moment when you realize, living like this, rushed, strained, disconnected, is not truly living. You don't have to abandon the world. You don't need to retreat to a mountain or shave your head. You don't have to become someone else. You just begin to pay attention to your own life with mindfulness. Start small. A meal eaten without rushing. A morning without immediately reaching for your phone. A moment of sitting still without fleeing from what you feel. Awakening doesn't come from something lofty. It begins the moment you choose to be fully present with what's already here. You don't need to be perfect to begin. You just need to be honest. honest about the fatigue, about your quiet longing to live more lightly, more truly, more deeply. And the beautiful thing is, the very moment you realize that, your journey has already begun. You don't need to master the Eightfold Path to take your first mindful step. You don't need to understand all of the Four Noble Truths to return to your breath. You don't need to be someone special. You just need to be yourself, right now, listening. The invisible root that nourishes all suffering. When we arrive at the third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, we go beyond merely recognizing that life is suffering, the first noble truth, or understanding where suffering comes from, the second noble truth. We begin to ask a deeper question: can suffering truly end? And if so, how do we end it? But uncovering the deepest root where suffering silently begins. This root, the Buddha called the origin of suffering, samadaya, which arises from the accumulation of greed, hatred, and delusion. Not just in this lifetime, but across countless lifetimes. When these emotional defilements are repeated over and over again, they don't just leave temporary impressions. They harden into unconscious patterns that shape how we think, speak, and act. These patterns are what we call karma. Put simply, karma is the habit of the mind, a collection of mental